Hey people, it's nice to just be with you sitting by my smoky fire. You know what they say about a man and a smoky fire? You can't separate them. So here we are. I'm going to do this week's devotions. Are going to be done outside the smoky fire here, and I'm going to try and crack as many as I can today. It's just great just to have some quiet time to be able to sit and do this. I hope that it's of benefit to you. Thank you for joining me. We were talking last week about the issue of temptation when Jesus was tempted of the devil 3 times. The last temptation was the one we focused on, where Satan took Jesus to a high mountain and said, "All of this I will give to you if you'll just worship me for 1 second." And then we read Jesus' response, where Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan. It is written," there's our key theme at the moment, "worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Well, here's the news. We've spent some weeks talking about worship, but worship is not in isolation. Worship is something that goes hand in hand with the next aspect of serving. He says, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. You see, Jesus' thesis here is not brain surgery. He's just saying you generally will serve that which you worship. The thing you love the most is the thing that will make you a servant or a slave to it. Now, here's what I want to begin by saying to you today. Servanting is one thing, but slavery is another. And for all of us, the journey begins at being a slave. The Bible tells us that before we become believers, we are slaves to sin. We're slaves to it. It's our master. It tells us what to do. It controls us. It has infiltrated our minds and programmed our thinking, and therefore out of what we think we do, therefore we don't do well because we're thinking all the wrong stuff. And Satan is telling us, and we know full well, that he wants us to not just be a servant, but he wants us to be a slave to him. This slavery thing, Paul battles with his own nature. I feel so much better when I hear Paul say, "Why is it that I know what is right to do, but I just can't do it? Why is it that I know what's wrong to do, and I just can't help it and do it?" And the answer to that, the reason you can't help doing it, is simply because you're a slave to it. Until you come to know Christ, you're a slave to sin. Kind of like the children of Israel in Egypt, in the book of Exodus, prior to Moses delivering them from Pharaoh's control. Pharaoh is often a picture of Satan and how he programmed their thinking. 400 years in Egypt, those guys began to walk like Egyptians and talk like Egyptians and go on just like Egyptians. He programmed their minds. After 10 generations, they were thinking and doing and speaking and acting Egyptian. And God knew that in order for him to be able to take them to the promised land, he had to get them out of slavery. That's where Moses came in. And God said, "Moses, I need you to relieve my children from Pharaoh's control." And Moses here is a beautiful picture of Jesus, how Jesus is just this intervention in humanity, the intervention into the world. And Jesus says, "I'm calling you out of slavery to become a servant of God." Before we get to servanting, we better talk about the slavery thing, which we're now presently doing. And we know that we're different when we realize that the things that we used to love are the things now that we hate. Some Christians even still battle with this, where the things that they used to love back there in Egypt, they still love, even though they're in the wilderness or on the journey to the promised land. They still look back over their shoulders as the children of Israel did, and they look into the misery and the horrible stuff that went on in Egypt. They still have a slave's mentality, even though they're living in the wilderness journey on the way to where God wanted them to go. The question we need to ask ourselves today, people, is have we still got that mindset? Maybe you've never come out of Egypt at all. Maybe you're saying, "Man, I know what it's like to live under the control of this worldly system. I know what it's like to understand the voice of Satan that I have no control over." Now, this whole thing, there are other associated tendencies of those who are slaves to sin. They have the tendency toward fear. They have the tendency toward pride. They have a tendency towards anger. They have a tendency towards bitterness. And there are Christians today who still battle with some of those things. But when you're a slave, those things have got you, baby, and they are not going to let you go without a fight. Then you have not just associated tendencies, but you have associated habits that come out of Egypt. And you've got to let go of these habits of criticalness, of complaining, of negativity, of pessimism, of critical spirit. Those are some of the things that just hold on to you once you have left Egypt. And it's a tough thing to have let them let you go, or maybe even better, for you to let those things go. So Paul is exactly right. While we're still slaves to sin, servanting is not going to be a possibility yet. But our hearts can be in that direction, to know what it is to serve God. We're not slaves to God. I'll talk about that maybe tomorrow. But we are servants of God. But it all begins in the slave pit. Have you been delivered from the slave pit? Have you come to trust Christ as your Lord and Savior? I really hope so, because He is your Moses person who will deliver you if you'll just let Him. I hope it has begun there for you. Have a good day. We'll be here tomorrow. Bye-bye.